today's webinar. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's grant solicitation webinar, OJJDP FY 2020 Family Drug Courts Program Grant Solicitation. My name is William Moore, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Everyone, please note that today's webinar is being recorded. For those of you wishing to download a copy of important documents and resources related to today's grant solicitation webinar, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions. Click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's grant solicitation webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenter will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. If you're viewing in a group, meaning it's yourself and additional people, go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today, not including yourself. And I'll give folks just a couple of minutes to provide that information. Again, this is only for individuals who are attending in a group, multiple people. Go in and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. Again, if you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. Again, thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. I will now turn it over to our presenter, Catherine Berry, for today's grant solicitation webinar. Catherine, take it away.
All right, thank you, William. So it looks as though right now we have around 134 participants in this webinar, and that is awesome. That's excellent attendance. I'm really excited about the interest in this year's solicitation, and I am happy to hopefully answer any burning questions you may have about the solicitation. But of course, if I'm not able to get to your questions, here is the response center information. I'm not going to be able to get to everything in the 1 hour that I have with you today, which is why it's critical that you keep this information handy, the 1-800 number, as well as the email address for NCJRS. The questions usually come to me if they're not quick and simple questions. At the end of this webinar, if you still have some remaining concerns or want more clarification on things that I just couldn't get to, feel free to reach out to the Response Center. It's also listed in the solicitation, and it's plastered all over these slides and resources as well. So we're going to move on to the topics that will be covered in this webinar. If you have questions or think that I'm going to be talking about anything outside these topics today, I apologize. But again, that's why we have the Response Center. So if you have questions outside of these topics, definitely feel free to email or call the Response Center. But I'm going to be providing a general overview of the program as it's outlined in the solicitation. I'm also going to be providing a general overview of the goals and objectives for each of the categories that are detailed in the solicitation. And then I'm also going to note any kind of changes from this that are happening this year in this solicitation that are new and different from last year's solicitation and maybe even the year prior, because I know some of you have some questions about that for sure. And then I'm going to do my best I can to cover all of the application requirements, but there are many, which is why when I get into the kind of Grants 101 and tips section for you guys, I'm going to strongly advise that you read the entire solicitation from page 1 all the way to the end, because many of the questions that have been coming in are actually answered in the solicitation if you read it in its entirety, every last word. So let's get going. Here's a link to the solicitation. Bookmark it on your web browser, and always have it at your fingertips if you are strongly considering submitting an application. As I said, answers to a lot of your questions will be in that solicitation, and if you have it bookmarked, you'll always have it there. So for each of these categories of funding, these will be 3-year awards. The overall goal for all 3 categories is to enhance existing, and that is actually a correction that should have been made. Unfortunately, this year we do not have an implementation category, so there is no new family drug court category or implementing new family drug court category. So this year it is only to be enhancing existing family drug courts to provide substance abusing parents with treatment and accountability by offering access to recovery services that will ultimately protect the children involved. And of course, we want to reunite families when safe to do so, and expedite permanency for those involved. There are 3 categories this year, and as I noted, there is no new family drug court implementation category this year. I know that's been a question. That is going to be a big difference this year from last year's solicitation as well as the previous year's solicitation. But here are what we are able to offer as far as funding. We have an enhancing family drug courts category. We are, which is not new and different from last year. We are also offering a serving veterans through family drug courts category, which we did have last year, but as I will detail a little bit later, we changed the description a bit this year, so to make it a bit more inclusive of existing family drug courts that are serving veterans already in your courts. So the language has changed from last year. And then we have a 3rd category, which is brand new this year, and we're really excited about, a state and county family drug court expansion category. And again, I'm going to go into each of these categories in detail. So for categories 1 and 2, so just specifically talking about the enhancing family drug courts category and then the serving veterans through family drug courts category, this really is limited to states, territories, state courts, and local courts, or units of local government and federally recognized Indian tribal governments. That's not new or different from last year or years prior. And the eligibility criteria that the family drug court be in operation for at least 1 year is also the same as previous years for the enhancing category, and then it's also the same for the serving veterans through family drug courts category that was offered last year as well. For category 3, this brand new category that we have this year, for those of you who are familiar with previous year's solicitations, we did offer a similar statewide systems reform, systems improvement program solicitation for family drug courts in fiscal year 2014. You can also take a look at the one that was out in fiscal year 2016 and get an idea of kind of some similar initiatives in this space that we did with those programs. But I will go through the eligibility, which is also similar from those previous solicitations and years. For state applicants, this is going to be limited to state administrative office of the court, working in conjunction and coordinating with the state's court improvement program. It is very critical for these applicants that they show that they have a partnership with the state child welfare agency and state substance use treatment agency. And how do you do that? You do that through the letters of intent from your partners as attachments. I've had some questions as to what should be in those letters. If you read the solicitation in its entirety, there's a whole section on what should go in letters of intent, letters of support, whatever you would like to call them, on page 12 of the solicitation. So this is a little different from years prior for our statewide initiatives in the family drug court space. We are also offering eligibility to large county applicants. And we are limiting large county applicants to those that have a population of at or above 2 million. If you're wondering where to get that information or what source to ensure that you are eligible to meet that criteria, just consult the most recent U.S. Census to ensure that you are in fact eligible and that you have the correct population data. So I'm going to go over the goals and objectives and some of the kind of activities outlined in Category 1, Enhancing Family Drug Courts. If you have applied in recent years or you took a gander at last year's solicitation, you'll notice for all three categories and for the solicitations at the Office of Justice Programs wide, solicitations are a lot less prescriptive this year. The categories have a description of the goals, and then we really just kind of want you to tell us what your needs are, how you intend to enhance your program, rather than us providing you with a ton of guidance on what we think your needs should be or what we think your program should be thinking about when proposing an application to us. So it's very simple that the goals in this category are to enhance or expand services of your existing family drug court program. The only thing that we ask is that whatever strategies or enhancements you are proposing, that they be evidence-based, and that there is a focus on treatment and recovery, as well as parenting, the child and parent trauma, and parent-child relationships. So that being said, we are focusing on treatment this year, but that does not mean that if you have another need, that you cannot propose it. So hopefully that answers some of your questions about whether or not we are only going to be funding treatment proposals. That is not the case. It's just, it is a focus. It's an area that we know that there's a tremendous need. And that is why it's in the solicitation. For Category 2, serving veterans through family drug courts, we did, as I said, offer this last year, but I think that the language kind of scared some applicants off, and we wanted to make sure that we kept it broad this year, that the intent of this category is really for those of you out there who have an existing family drug court that are already serving veterans in your family treatment court, or you're seeing veterans come in through the door, and you really are looking for an opportunity and way to enhance the services for the veterans coming through your program. So that being said, you tell us what your needs are when serving veterans in your program, and what strategies you would like to try to employ to enhance services for the veterans in your family treatment courts. The only thing that we ask is that whatever you're proposing, that they obviously reflect military competence, and that you are able to detail how the funds, if awarded in this category, will be restricted to veteran or military service members in your program. And you should be able to detail a very clear understanding of the veteran population in your community and how it is, substance use is impacting the families of veterans in your community, as well as develop and execute contracts or MOUs with local veteran and children family serving agencies in your community as well. For categories 1 and 2, it should be noted that on page 12 of the solicitation, we ask that you address these key 8 components of a family drug court. If these are new to you and you're not sure where to start in addressing each of these components, I will say that these components have been listed and detailed in previous year's solicitation. I would point you to last year's solicitation where we were actually able to flesh each of these 8 components out if you would like a bit more guidance on what these components mean. And hopefully that can help you when you're crafting your application. Now, categories 1 and 2 don't require letters of support. I will say, though, that we would recommend that you submit letters of support. I think it really enhances the capabilities and capacity section of your application when we have peer reviewers looking and scoring your applications. But you know, if you are going to be providing them, they should be from each of the key drug court team members, such as your judge, child welfare, attorneys, as well as treatment providers and your drug court coordinator. Category 2 applicants, serving veterans through family drug courts, letters of support from relevant agencies serving veterans in your community, anybody you think that you would benefit from partnering with your program, you should definitely get a letter of support from them. It will really enhance your application. But again, I will say that letters of support are not required or mandatory for categories 1 and 2. I would just say I strongly encourage you to get them and include them in your application. It's a real star on your application. Now I'm going to talk a bit about state and county drug courts expansion. This is category 3. As I said, the idea was for this to be very similar to our past statewide initiatives under family drug court programming, but we made it a little different this year. It's a lot less prescriptive, and the idea really is to support states and large counties. And why large counties, right? Some folks are kind of asking, why is it limited to states and then counties over 2 million? The idea was to also be able to capture and include some of those really large counties that practically function as states, where they actually do have a network and system of family drug courts in their county, and they could benefit from a award that is focused on system-wide improvement, enhancement, or expansion. So hopefully that answers some of your questions about the county, the addition of large counties as being eligible for this category. But the idea really is to be supporting states and large counties to enhance or expand family treatment court and recovery practices at the larger state and larger county levels to address some of those systemic challenges and more effectively serve families that are affected by substance use disorders in their state or large county. I will say that we've been, as I said, kept this category not prescriptive. There have been some questions around whether or not what does expansion or enhancement mean? What if we need to create new family drug courts in certain areas of our state, or that is a proposed strategy that we want to utilize? There is nothing in the solicitation for this particular category that says that implementing or creating new family drug courts as part of your statewide strategy to enhance or expand family treatment court practices. There's nothing that prohibits that. So hopefully that provides some clarification around there. Now, this category does have some activities that applicants should think about on page 7 of the solicitation. Really think about ways to strengthen cross-systems collaboration, enhancing or expanding, which can include new family drug courts, family drug court practices into the larger state or larger county child welfare, substance use disorder treatment, and court systems. So we are kind of looking for folks that are proposing big changes in their states or large counties, particularly around increasing the scale and scope of services, which could mean enhancing your existing family drug courts or implementing new family drug courts, or both. It really depends on the needs of your state or your large county. Now, there are some expectations if you are awarded in this category that you will complete a needs assessment of your state or large county, and that after that needs assessment that you will implement the proposed enhancements identified in that assessment over 3 years with a very clear plan of action. We also would like for you to think of ways to develop and strengthen your state or county level information sharing, evaluation, and performance monitoring. That is definitely an area for this category that we are going to be looking for in your application. And I just wanted to let you know, I know you guys have some questions coming in, and I'm seeing them in my little ticker for sure. And I'm going to roll through this to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So when we get there, I'm going to start off by addressing a lot of the questions that came in before the webinar. I'm going to answer as many questions as I can in the ticker that I'm getting right now during the webinar. And then you'll also have more time to continue to ask questions in the little chat box. So I'm not ignoring you. I promise we will get to your questions, particularly if they're relevant for the whole group. If they get nitty-gritty and into the weeds about programmatic stuff and questions you might have about programmatic questions, I might not be able to get to those, but I promise we will try. Now I'm going to get back to the webinar and continue with category 3. Now this category does require letters of support or MOUs because we are requiring you to partner with the state or county child welfare agency and the state or county substance use treatment agency. So we really do need to get those letters from you and see that there's demonstrated support from those agencies. Again, what should be included in those letters are detailed on page 12 of the solicitation, and they really should include an expression of support and willingness to collaborate. A description of the roles and responsibilities too should go in those letters, and if they can, it gets kind of detailed and it's hard to estimate the time that the partner is willing to devote, but if that's something that they can touch on, that always helps as well. Now, these are program requirements for all of the categories, and I will say that these are statutory appropriations requirements for all of the funding in this solicitation. As you may or may not know, we get our money from Congress. It's appropriated to us, and this money has specific statutory requirements that anybody that is receiving these funds has to comply with these programmatic requirements. So just stating that, because we didn't pull these out of thin air, these were actually written down for us by law. So the programs that you propose have to address opioid stimulant and substance abuse reduction. So there has to be some sort of statement, something in there that makes it clear that you are addressing opioid stimulant and substance abuse reduction through your program. You have to identify how you're going to evaluate your program. It could be a small way. I know not all of you have the funds or the capacity for evaluation, but it's definitely a requirement. You need to think about how you're going to collect the data, how are you going to assess the outcomes of your program. However big that evaluation effort is or small, you need to talk about it in your application to us. You also have to discuss plans for sustaining your program after federal funds would discontinue. As with any program that is dependent on various different funding streams, everybody should have a sustainability plan, and that should be detailed in your application as well. And then here's the catch-all. On page 5 of the solicitation, there are a number of different statutory requirements that are kind of outlined there that our Office of General Counsel made sure was in there. So please take a look at the statutory requirements on page 5 of the solicitation and make sure that the program that you're proposing complies. So this was something that was recently introduced last year. Some of you may or may not have seen this last year. The Office of Justice Programs now has some priority areas of funding. One, addressing rural communities. And if you are a rural community applying for funding, you should make sure you state that in your application and also state what makes you rural. I would suggest using the U.S. Census as a resource and a citation or any other appropriate governmental data as a citation when you're making the case for being a rural community that should receive priority. This is also something we did last year, so this shouldn't be new if you applied for or read the solicitation last year, where we are going to also be giving priority consideration to what we call qualified opportunity zones, or QOZs for short, because we're the federal government and we like to use acronyms for everything. But these are programs that are serving areas that are economically distressed. On page 8 of the solicitation, there is a link to what has, like, the actual QOZs. So with a number and everything associated with it. There's also detailed instructions on how, if you want to be considered for this priority area, there are detailed instructions on how and what you need to submit. And I will say that there were a number of applicants last year that tried to apply for this consideration but didn't follow the directions completely right, and so we couldn't actually qualify for them for this consideration, and that made me sad because it's just a matter of making sure you read the directions. You have to state exactly what opportunity zone you qualify for, and then you also have to provide a separate explanation for why you are a economically distressed community. It's not enough to just say that we are serving XYZ areas according to the numbers listed in the solicitation. When you click that link, you'll see the numbers. You also have to provide a separate narrative justification. So make sure you do that if you want to be given that priority consideration. Now, there have been some questions about, how would this apply for Category 3 applicants? And, that is a very good question. And I think that that is something that I'm going to have to talk to my own supervisor about and get clarification as far as the Category 3 applicants. How would they be able to receive priority consideration for that category? So definitely stay tuned for an answer on that question. And please, if you haven't done so already, submit that question to the Response Center if you are interested or think that you may be able to receive priority consideration for rural communities or QOZs for Category 3 applicants. We definitely need to clarify that because it is not clear. So budget planning, each applicant has to budget for 2 grantee meetings the first year and 1 grantee meeting each successive year in your budget. So when you are drafting your budgets for each of the categories, this goes for each of the categories 1 through 3, you need, in the travel section, you need to budget and allocate for an annual grantee meeting. And there's a detailed description in the solicitation on for how many days, 2.5 days. Assume that it'll be in Washington, D.C. It might not be if you're awarded, but just for purposes of creating a budget and allocating money for travel for annual grantee meetings. We will be looking for that to make sure that it is in your budget, so make sure that it is in there. And we ask that you plan to send a minimum of 4 people to those meetings, which would include your project director, the family drug court judge or judicial officer, a child welfare representative, as well as a treatment representative. And for the state applicants, the state and large county applicants, it would be the project director for the statewide project or the countywide project that is applying for these funds, a relevant, I would say, judge or judicial officer at the state level or county level, and then as well as a state representative from both the child welfare and treatment agencies. So there is a link in the solicitation to expected performance measures. You are not expected in the application to detail how exactly you're going to collect on each of the performance measures listed in that link. So don't in your application provide. I've seen this before where applicants feel like they have to show exactly how they're going to collect information for each of those performance measures. That's not what it's there for. The link is there for you to understand that should you get this award, these are the performance measures that you will be expected to collect information on, and to prepare yourself for that. And you have the capacity to do that. And your application should detail how you're going to collect those measures. What is your program's capacity, existing capacity, or should you get the funds, what additional capacity will you have to be able to evaluate and collect performance measures for your program, especially the ones that OJJDP would be requiring of you. And here is a link to it's the performance measurement page at OJP, where you can then hunt and search for some of the current performance measures for our family drug court programs, if you would like to take a look at what is expected as well as performance measurement activity at the Office of Justice Programs in general. So at the end of the solicitation, you'll notice the application checklist. What I would say is if you are new to applying for federal funds, please review what is in Appendix B on what an applicant should do, which is on page 19. Use that use Appendix B and all the checklist requirements that are on there, because you have to make sure those are all met in order to pass what we call basic minimum requirements, as well as be able to submit a successful federal application. Federal applications are no joke. I come from the grant writing world before my position here, and I've written all kinds of grants, and the federal grants were always the biggest bear. There were always so many different loops and hoops and things you had to jump through to make sure that you were just even eligible to submit an application, let alone all the requirements and the attachments that go along with it. So really utilize the end of the solicitation and those checklists and whatnot, and print it out, have it next to you, physically check things off as you get them done, so that you make sure that you have all of the critical elements you need when submitting your application. This year, the following critical elements to just make it past the first round of review and to get into our inboxes is that you make sure you submit that program narrative. Be sure you submit the program narrative, as well as your budget and budget narrative. Those will be the two bare minimum requirements that you have to submit in order to at least make it into peer review. So if anything else, make sure you submit those two items to us. So these next few slides, I'm going to go over kind of some grants 101 tips for submitting applications to us, things that I've seen during peer review, things that I've seen before peer review that have happened to applicants that unfortunately didn't even make it to peer review because of not meeting certain requirements. So hopefully these next few slides of tips and tools will be helpful for you. So there's this wonderful part of the OJP website called Grants 101, and I provided you with the link here. I don't think it's talked about that much, but it provides anything and everything you would need to know to submit a successful application to us. And it gets really detailed, much more detailed than I can on this webinar. So I highly suggest, even if you have submitted a federal application before, that you review it as well. Even if you have successfully been awarded a federal application before and you think you have this down, go to this website and review everything on it. It has some great information there that I highly endorse and I think would really help you in crafting and drafting your application to us. If you are brand new to applying for federal funds and you have never done this before, you must do the following now, like right after this webinar. You need to acquire a DUNS number, you need to register with SAM, and you need to register with grants.gov. That is the first thing you need to do right now. And because that can take anywhere between 10 and 14 business days to just complete or be done. And that doesn't, you may have accidentally done something wrong, which then could delay the process. So do that now. Make sure you get that, that all set, because without that, you can't even apply. And it can take a little while. And I just wouldn't want you to wait until the last minute and realize you haven't had that done, especially when it can take so long to go through the various different systems. The solicitation provides links and for you to complete each of those registrations. As I stated in the beginning of this webinar, please read the entire solicitation carefully from page 1 all the way to the end. It's a long solicitation. I know it's a lot to read, but we have found that a lot of applicants miss out on important details, things that were included in the solicitation. Maybe they were buried in the middle or buried 2/3 of the way in. But I will say the answer to probably a lot of your questions are actually in the solicitation if you read it carefully, word for word. And there are links, really helpful links to a lot of areas that would probably also answer your questions. So click on the links and read what's on the links for sure. And then another thing that I would do right now after this webinar, if you haven't done so already, identify and contact the project partners that you intend to partner with on your application. Working out those roles and responsibilities, talking to the partners who you want involved, and really fleshing out the program and the vision and how you getting on the same page about the enhancements or strategies that you want to employ now will really help you in writing your application. It'll make it a lot easier to flesh that out now and have them working on their letters now. So you have a very clear understanding of what your program is going to look like and what your proposal is going to look like as well. This may seem kind of elementary, but I see this a lot where questions and review criteria are not answered in the order that they're presented in the solicitation in an applicant's application. Sometimes applicants answer questions all over the place in their application and don't kind of follow the order of the questions as they are listed in the solicitation, which makes it really hard for the peer reviewers when they're reviewing and scoring your applications to be able to check off the box, yeah, they answered this question, yeah, they answered this requirement. So make sure that you are following the questions in the review criteria in the order that they are listed in the solicitation, because that is how the reviewers are going to be reviewing your application as well and checking off to make sure that you've hit everything that you need to hit in your proposal. Another tip that I would strongly encourage you to understand are what percentage is each section of your application worth. This is listed in the solicitation. Each section has a certain percentage of worth during peer review. So when the peer reviewers give you scores, one section is not weighted the same as others. So when you're trying to allocate page real estate, you have 30 pages, right, to write your program. Understand how many pages you should probably be dedicating to the statement of the issue and how many pages you should probably be allocating to the program design section, etc., based on how much each section is weighted and worth in the scoring. I would also propose that you draft your budget early, maybe even before you start writing your application, because ultimately what your budget should be kind of informing what you're discussing and talking about in your application. Peer reviewers often will look at your budget and look at your proposal, the 30-page narrative, program narrative, and try to reconcile them. Does it make sense? What they've asked for in their budget, does it match and align with what they're proposing in their program narrative? I would also suggest that you aim to submit your application, and I know some of you probably won't do this. We always have the folks that submit right up until the deadline, but I would suggest you don't do that and try to submit, tell yourself your deadline is a couple days before the actual deadline, because you never know what kind of challenges you may encounter. You may hit submit and then realize that, oh man, I forgot XYZ attachments. I will say that we review the most recent application that you have submitted. So if you need to resubmit an application because you forgot something, you would have time to do that if you submitted a few days earlier. You also don't know if you'll have any kind of tech challenges, technology challenges. We have that happen all the time. So just do yourself a favor and try to submit early. Here are some useful links, the solicitation, FAQs, which provide some information on previous year's solicitations, links to previous year's solicitations, as well as where you can maybe take a gander and look at previous year awards and proposals if you want to look at some samples, etc. And then also here's a link to the grant application resource guide. In previous year solicitation, we had so much information on grant applications, and instead we're now directing everybody to this link, the resource guide, which provides a ton of useful information on every aspect of the grant application online at your fingertips on the web rather than in the solicitation. So definitely utilize the application resource guide for sure. And with that, now I'm going to get to your questions. I'm going to start by addressing some of the questions that came in before the webinar. So those of you that submitted some questions before the webinar that you wanted to make sure I answered, I tried to sprinkle some answers throughout what I just talked about, but there's some that I wasn't necessarily to kind of be able to answer through the slides we just went through. So what I will say, there have been some questions about, well, what will you fund? What can these funds actually be applied to? They can be applied to anything, which is the beauty of the OJJDP Family Drug Court Awards, as opposed to if you say are familiar with some SANSA awards that focus on treatment. We can fund operational expenses. So we've had folks ask for personnel funds. We've had folks ask for travel funds to be able to travel to trainings, conferences, etc. We have folks ask for funds for contract services, whether that be with a treatment provider, whether it be contracting for attorney services. Really, the sky is the limit. So propose it. If it's not allowed, we will tell you. But if it has a treatment and recovery component and it's critical to your program and being able to fulfill the goals and objectives of your program, that's kind of the limit on what you can ask for as far as funding. So hopefully that kind of is a good thing, that you feel comfortable. If you have a need, that's kind of why the solicitations are not prescriptive this year. If you have a need, apply for it and ask for funding, as long as obviously it aligns with the goals and objectives of the Family Drug Court program. I also had some questions around what qualifies as match. I would say definitely go to that grant application resource guide that has a whole section on what qualifies as match. But we've had awardees propose lots of different things as match. Salaried time, like a percentage of somebody's salary as in-kind match. We've had folks propose, they already have treatment services paid for by another funding stream, so they're using that as match. So there are lots of different things you can use as match, but it is detailed in that application resource guide, so I would invite you to go ahead and take a look at that and read up on that for sure. What other questions do we have? We had a lot of questions right before the webinar started, so I'm going to pull up that email quickly and try to address some of those. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them again. Some of these I've already answered. So again, back to the burning question about not having a new family drug courts or implementation category of funding this year. Unfortunately, that is that issue is closed. There will not be any other family drug court program solicitation released this fiscal year. So I would invite you to please take a look at the forecast for fiscal year 2021 when it is released to see if we are trying to forecast for a implementation or new family drug court category next year. I know it was forecasted this year, but unfortunately it did not make it into the solicitation this year. So definitely take a look at the forecast for 2021 if you are still very interested in implementation funding. It has not gone away. I can say that, and we are very attuned to the needs of the field, and we are doing our best to make sure the solicitations match the needs of the field for sure. With that, I'm going to try to look at some of the questions that came in during the webinar. So give me a second while I read up on my little ticker here while we have some time. So there was a question, somebody asked about Category 1 and the eligibility requirements, stating units of local government, and if the 2 million population eligibility requirement applies to that category as well. No, the 2 million, if you are a county applying under Category 3, you have to have a population of 2 million or above. That does not apply to Categories 1 or 2. If you're a county applying Categories 1 or 2, it does not matter what your population size is. You will be eligible to apply. Letters of support and all attachments are not part of the 30-page program narrative limit. So that's clearly outlined in the solicitation, so just make sure you reread the solicitation and really understand the requirements, all the attachments and whatnot. You can attach the world if you want to your application. You could attach as many attachments as you want, and it wouldn't apply to the 30-page limit for that program narrative piece where you're detailing each of those different areas from the statement of the issue all the way down to your capabilities and competency section. Let's see, reading some more questions. If you have received a SAMHSA grant for expanding family treatment court in your jurisdiction, you are eligible to apply for any of these categories. You are not excluded. It doesn't matter what other grants you have, you are not ineligible to apply for this solicitation. So the federal, if you have other federal grants, it doesn't mean that it disqualifies you from also receiving funds through this award. The only thing that you should be careful of is supplanting, right? You don't want to be double dipping in federal funds. So if there's an additional enhancement that was not funded by your SAMHSA grant that is different and separate from the funding that you're getting through your SAMHSA grant, you're more than welcome to apply for an OJJDP grant to fill in maybe some of the gaps that your SAMHSA grant is not filling in. But you just got to make sure you're not asking for you're not funding the same thing. No double dipping, that's all. More questions here. So some of these questions are very detailed. So if you have a pretty specific question that I don't get to in this webinar, again, you see the information for the Response Center up on the slide right now. Write it down. and make sure after this webinar that you send in that question so that you get an answer to your question. But in the interest of time, I'm trying to only answer the questions that would apply to the masses. So I have a question about expansion and what the definition of expansion means. And I would like to make sure that I take a gander at the actual solicitation language to make sure that I am adequately addressing this person's question. So if you are not applying in Category 3 and you are applying in Categories 1 or 2, which are enhancement categories, or it's really, the idea is for you to be an existing family drug court for over 1 year. You are an existing family drug court that is desiring to expand or enhance the services of that family drug court, not implementing a new family drug court somewhere else. If that means you are trying to, for that existing family drug court in that jurisdiction, you would like to enhance your treatment services, add some more personnel, critical personnel to your team, et cetera. The sky is the limit on what you may need to do to enhance or expand the services of that existing family treatment court to enhance the services and outcomes for the participants in your family drug court. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but hopefully I'm confirming that the categories 1 and 2 are not to fund new family drug courts. They're to enhance the services being offered through existing family drug courts, and however that shapes up, or whatever needs you have to enhance those services for your existing family drug court, you tell us what those needs are. We're not telling you what those needs are, but we're trying to be kind of free and open on what you think your barriers or needs are in those 2 categories, and tell us what those are. So to confirm, the question is greater than 2 million for county applicants only applies to Category 3. Yes, the 2 million population requirement only applies to county applicants who are applying for Category 3, not Categories 1 and 2. And let's see. So who are considered key personnel for the required resumes? That's really dependent on each applicant and who is at the table on your family treatment court team. I would say for sure, who's in your staffing or your family treatment court team meetings. Those are for sure key folks, key personnel. But maybe there is a project director or a grant manager or coordinator that you might also want to include in there that isn't necessarily part of the family treatment court team, but it is essential to ensuring that the project is going the way it should be going. Definitely include their resumes as well. Are there any mechanisms for connecting with groups? Anybody that's applying? I'm not aware, but what I will say is that there is a training and technical assistance provider that we have right now called the Center for Children and Family Futures. I would definitely write that down, the Center for Children and Family Futures. They are an excellent resource if you're trying to look for some some technical assistance in developing your program or talking through some of the strategies you're thinking about applying. So use them as a resource. And with that, I'm going to end the Q&A session of this webinar. If you have any burning questions, definitely send them to the Response Center. I'm going to hand it back over to William.
All right, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you, Catherine, and thank you all for those who've attended today's webinar. Before we officially wrap up, just a couple of quick brief announcements and a few last-minute polls that we have for those remaining. Again, for those of you who are looking to possibly contact or would like to make sure that they stay in touch with OJJDP's INTAC, you may do so by following us on Facebook or join us on our listserv as well. The links are live here on this slide. If you would like to get in contact with OJJDP, please feel free to contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. The contact information is included on this slide. Do you have a training and technical assistance need? Well, if so, please submit a request via OJJDP's TTA 360 platform. And before we end, we have two quick poll questions that we'd like our audience to complete prior to leaving. This information will help us with webinars in the future. The first poll question I have for you all here: how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work? And feel free to check all that apply. And I'll give folks just who remain on just a few seconds to indicate. Again, how do you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work? And please feel free to check all that apply. Folks, just a few more seconds here to indicate how you plan to apply the information from this webinar in your work, and feel free to check all that apply. Oh, still coming in. Okay. I'll give folks maybe about 15 more seconds. I'll do that. Again, thank you all for joining today's webinar. Just a few poll questions that will help us to improve webinars in the future. Okay. All right. We're going to go ahead and end this poll here. Thank you all for those who indicated information there. And then our last question here: what webinar topics would you like to see offered by the National Training and Technical Assistance Center in fiscal year 2020? This is a poll where you're able to go ahead and enter any and all information by simply typing in your answer. And so all you'll do is just type in the answer and we'll gather the information there. There's a little box right below the question there. It says type your answer here. If you just go in and type the information there and hit enter, or the send button that's right at the very end there at the end of the webinar or the poll, and then it'll send in your information. So feel free to let us know what webinar topics would you like to see offered by OJJDP's INTAC in the future. And I'll give folks just a few more seconds to maybe enter in whatever topics that they would like to maybe see INTAC to offer in the future. And again, any and all information you provide here will be confidential and is information that will help to improve our webinars in the future. All right. All right, I'll go right up to the minute. We're at 3:04, and so I'll give folks maybe about 30 more seconds to provide information. Again, these polls are completely optional. You don't have to enter any information, but just wanted to gather some information from our audience here before we adjourn. All right, great. Well, that being said, I'll go ahead and close this poll in about 10 seconds because more people are typing. All right. Great. Thank you, audience. Thank you so much. And again, with that, we will be concluding today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Goodbye.
The host has left